What's up, everybody? Welcome to the BeTempered podcast, episode number
36.
Boy, do we have a powerful one today.
Oh, yeah, because Kim's here.
Say hi, Kim.
Hi.
Kim is my lovely, amazing wife and the mother of our 5 children. And we just, she's here today because one of the most inspiring people that we've ever heard talk or read a book about, we're fortunate enough to have on the podcast today. And what a story. I mean, what a story John O'Leary has. And I'm going to read the bio about John, and then we'll just talk a little bit about, because we did just record it, so it's fresh on our mind. I got goosebumps by having this conversation. What if one message could change your life? What if one person could provide hope that the best is yet to come? This person is John O'Leary. As a 9-year-old boy, John was burned on 100% of his body and given less than a 1% chance to live. His amazing journey of survival illustrates the incredible power of the human spirit. Today, John is the author of the national best-selling books On Fire and In Awe. He's the host of the top-rated Live Inspired podcast. He's an inspiring speaker who's taught millions of people around the world how to live inspired. And are you ready for something exciting? His story has recently been turned into a full-length feature film slated for theatrical release in 2025. He's a business owner, he's a writer, he's a husband and a father of 4, once expected to die, now teaching others to truly live. That's John's intro, and he even talked about what you'll hear coming up is that he's embarrassed by that when he gets introduced at speaking events, but he is a humble man. He's an amazing man. And I think the most amazing part of this story with John, and we don't even really get into, is that, this happened to him when he was 9 years old. He makes a recovery. He goes into the workforce eventually. And I think it's 20 years later, roughly, from when all this happens, that he tells his story to a group of Girl Scouts. And again, that's not something we talk about today, but if you read the books, you'll hear that. And I think that's what's amazing. And now that's his life, is telling that story.
Right. And he went back to school, and the class that he took, I think they gave him a C, and he said, "John, the only reason I'm giving you a C is because I love you." Yeah. And then the Girl Scouts, he struggled with that. And
yeah, it's amazing. And I remember, Kim, you and I we were flying somewhere, I don't know, going on vacation. And this was when we first heard John's story, and you were reading the book On Fire. And I just remember sitting on the plane looking over, and you're crying. And I'm like, what are you crying about? You already know this story, but the book goes in such detail. And I think, as parents as we are, and having kids at 9 years old, at this very moment when we do this interview, you just relate as a parent, and you have those feelings of, man, what if that's Ryan, or what if that's Cy, just an amazing story. And I'm excited for everybody to hear it.
Yeah. I think one of the things, too, that he talks about in there was what his mom said. Yeah. I think that's one of the things that hits home for me, is because the way he worded it when he was talking kind of hit me, because he said, you were talking about what's the percentage that you live. And then he said, you take your age plus the way his body was burned. Well, his body was burned 100%, 109% chance of death. Yeah. And he said that the doctor was telling his mom that because, they were wanting her to know, hey, it's not looking good. Your son's going to die. You just need to come to grips with it. And what's the first thing that she tells her son? What, do you want to live? Okay. I can't do anything for you. You got to take the hand of God and just trust him, Yeah. And I feel like that's a big thing with faith, is that's what we have to do. And I don't know, that's one of the things I took from, his story and everything. And then you think of, he always talks about God and what he does. And the scripture that you read was Job at the end there, right? Yep. Well, did Job have a very fun life? You know what I mean? No. And, a lot of people, when they go through trials and everything through life, they go back to Job, and that's what they read. And, how they constantly, nope, I've had my faith in God. I have my faith in God. And it's kind of, John's story kind of does the same exact thing. You know what I mean? What are you going through? Were you burned? Were you supposed to die? No. And the way he just puts his faith in God and stuff like that, I think is just really inspiring. That's one of the things, when he worded it like that, that's what was going through my mind, at least.
He's a humble man. He's an amazing man. He's got an amazing story, family. It's just awesome. So I'm super excited for everybody to hear this, and here he is.
Hi, my name is Allie Schmidt. This is my dad, Dan. He owns Caitlin's Glass.
Thanks, Allie. Things like doors and windows go into making a house. But when it's your home, you expect more, like the great service and selection you'll get from Caitlin's Glass. Vinyl replacement windows from Caitlin's come with a lifetime warranty, including accidental glass breakage replacement. Also ask for custom shower doors and many other products and services. Call 962-1636. Locally owned with local employees for nearly 30 years.
Caitlin's Glass, the clear choice.
Welcome to the BeTempered podcast, where we explore the art of finding balance in a chaotic world.
Join us as we delve into insightful conversations, practical tips, and inspiring stories to help you navigate life's ups and downs with grace and resilience.
We're your hosts, Dan Schmidt and
Ben Spar.
Let's embark on a journey to live our best lives.
This is BeTempered.
John O'Leary, welcome to the BeTempered podcast.
Brothers, I am thrilled to be on, man. Thank you for hosting me.
You got it. We are so excited to have you on here. And I told you here just a little bit ago that, we've read your books, On Fire and In Awe, and listened to your Live Inspired podcast. And so this is truly an honor to be able to have this conversation with you this morning.
Well, man, listen, what people don't realize is when you jump onto a podcast, there's always the pre-record conversation. And that's when you actually get to know the heart of the guy you're about to sit across from. And as we were chatting, I realized these are not only podcast hosts, but these are the kinds of guys that are my brothers, man. They're my friends. And so to join you two and to join your community, this is a pleasure.
We appreciate it. So, John, your journey is one of incredible resilience and transformation, and it all began with one moment that changed your life. So can you talk about growing up as a kid in St. Louis and then that experience that happened when you were 9 years old?
Yeah, man, it's so strange because so much of your life, you don't realize it is that moment until moments or days or years or decades later. And for me, this moment you're asking me to define, I actually ignored it for 20 years. And so I'm sure later on in our conversation, we'll talk about how do you ignore something that massive? But that was my way of coping with it. So here's the story in a nutshell. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, just outside, about 20 minutes from the Gateway Arch. I had a mom and a dad who loved each other fiercely and loved their 6 kids, let us get dogs and catch rabbits and bring in turtles into the house. And we had an awesome upbringing. It was great. And then at age 9, I had witnessed the week previously kids playing with fire and gasoline. And these were boys I looked up to, and I assumed if they could do it, I could do it as well, maybe even better, maybe even bigger. So I waited till my mom and dad left the house on a Saturday morning. As their driveway was now empty, their cars rolling down the street, I walked into the garage, lit a piece of cardboard on fire, walked over to a can of gasoline and tried to pour just a little bit of gas on top of this flame. And guys, you know the story. Your listeners probably already know where the story goes. Before the liquid came out, the fumes pulled it into the can, created this massive explosion, picked up the 9-year-old little fella, and then launched him 20 feet against the far side of the garage. And so that is the moment that began this profound change in my life.
Yes, and it's profound indeed. So talk about, that happens, you're 9 years old, you're playing with fire, which you shouldn't have been, and obviously learned a very, very hard lesson. But there were some pivotal points from the time that happened. Your parents aren't away, but you've got some siblings that are home, right?
Right. Well, it's cool that you know that. I mean, most folks don't, because I don't share this frequently on podcasts and almost never in speeches because it's so intense. So, but my siblings were home, and they were ordinary Midwest siblings, which means they weren't all that, man. We fought over table space. We fought over food scraps. We fought over dessert. We fought over who had to take the trash out or do the dishes, kind of typical upbringing. And so that day, as I'm truly on fire, guys, I came out of the garage. I ran through the house. My clothes are covered in gasoline, and the flames are leaping off of those clothes. And so this little boy is a little torch, man. And my sisters who saw me first, they started screaming. It woke my brother up. My brother Jim was 17. He came racing over to me, picked up a throw rug, began beating down the flames, burned himself in the process. Took him almost 2 minutes to knock down the flames entirely. I'm just like, for those of you who've touched anything hot lately, what do you do naturally? And you draw back, you save yourself. But what makes my brother so remarkable is, although he was burning himself, he didn't draw back. He just kept stepping closer and beat down the fire, beat down the flames, saved my life, carried me outside, rolled around on the wet snow and with me, trying to put down the fire the rest of the way. Goes back into the house, calls 911. And that's when these two little girls come outside in their nightgowns. It's January in the Midwest. It's cold. It's bad outside. They're barefoot. One of the girls comes over to me in a nightgown, and she just holds me. And like, years to reflect on this, it makes more sense now. But even then, I knew it was good to be held. When you're struggling, to be comforted and to know you're not alone, it does matter. So this 11-year-old has comforted me in the front yard. And she just kept saying, John, everything's all right. Have faith and fight. And I remember thinking, well, it's nice to hear, but I looked down, guys, I saw my hands all burned up, my arms, I'm naked. My legs are burned up. Everything is trash. And when I look up, that's when I see my house on fire. And, I caused those flames. Like that's on me. And so just the weight of it all, it just crushed my soul as a 9-year-old. And I remember looking at her and saying, Amy, knock it off, with the encouragement. I'm not okay. Go back into the house. I don't care if it's on fire. Get a knife, come back out here and just finish me off. Like I'm not fine. And this little girl, I remember, guys, she pulls me closer and she says, John, shut up. What's wrong with you, man? Have faith and fight. The best is yet to come. And to put a bow on this story and kind of move forward from this story, overhearing this conversations, my younger sister, Susan, she's 7. She goes, after I tell everybody to go into the house and get a knife, and she takes off running for the front door. She goes through the smoke. I don't know where she's going. Makes her way into the kitchen, blindly feels around, grabs whatever she went in there for, comes back outside. And guys, I'll always remember standing in front of my mom and dad's house, being held by one sister, being naked in the front yard, watching the flames leap through the roof line, and watching this little girl, dark hair, come running through the smoke over to my side, tears over her big fat cheeks. And then she throws a cup of water right into my face. Like that morning, I wanted to die, and this girl's risking her life for water to beg me to live. She turns, goes back, and gets a second cup. And then she turns and she goes back and she gets a third cup. It's one of the most remarkable stories in Scripture. No greater love is there than this, than to be willing to lay down one's life for one's friends. And very few of us actually know what that's like, to try to do that, to be willing truly to do that. And yet on the day I was burned, I saw it in action. I saw a little girl go into a burning house, risking her life for mine. She came out safely, and I think ultimately her love that day not only gave me hope to move forward, but guys, I'm burned from my neck to my toes, not on my face, not on my scalp. And that is where they drew the rest of the skin from my body from. It's called a donor site. But they used my scalp, and the doctors credit her with saving that part of my body.
That's amazing, John. And I'll tell you, I think what probably relates for me, and I think for my wife and for Ben, is, we have kids. My wife and I have 5 kids. Our youngest is a 9-year-old little boy. Ben's got 3 boys, and he's got a 9-year-old son. And so, when you hear stories like this that are just unbelievable, you relate it to your family. So, I'm picturing my 9-year-old son, this happening to him, and it just brings it all home, and the love that your siblings had for you, and just the wherewithal to do what they did to help to save you, essentially.
Dude, it's overwhelming. I mean, as I've grown in my life, and I don't like the word success, but the world would define it as that. Like I'm 2-time best-selling author and movies about our life and like success. But if you look at my book covers, I'm not photoed on the front or the back. I recognize how little I did in this story. I was almost more like I hopped into a canoe and went down some wild rapids. But man, I never even held an oar. Like, I had parents, I had siblings, I had volunteers. We had friends in the community and strangers and nurses and doctors and people praying all over the country and all over the world. So I'm able to share this story again and again, day after day, because it's not about me. Like, if it was about me, if I was telling you how I climbed a mountain, I would be so freaking bored with myself in these podcasts and these stories and the books. I'd be so bored. But it's not, man. It's about a 7-year-old girl risking her life for someone else. And I think that connects with me. I'm glad it connects with you, and I hope it's connecting with your audience.
Oh, absolutely. And I want to fast forward a little bit. You get into the hospital and, everything's going on. You're burned 100% of your body, essentially giving what, a 1% chance to live?
I mean, that's the math, but the real math is this. So in 2024, if your little guy got burned, they would take the percentage of his body burned, they would add age, 9, and they would know what mortality is. So if he was burned on 60% of his body, he would have a 69% likelihood of death. That's in 2024. In 1987, this boy presents with burns to 100% of his body. He's 9, and he's going to die. I mean, they're going to fight. They're going to do the good work, but they know what's about to happen here. And so when they told my mother that he's got less than a 1% chance of surviving the first night, they weren't saying 1 in 200 or something. They were trying to slowly let her know she's got to start letting go of her son. They were trying to be as sweet and as tender with her as they could.
And it's amazing because I want you to talk about, you're laying in bed and you don't realize you're fighting. You're fighting for your life, but you don't realize you're 9 years old, right? You can't really comprehend what's going on. But talk about the story when your dad walks in and the fear that you had and that whole conversation.
Right, man. It's the same fear that I had when I looked into my son's eyes last night as he brought me his second quarter report card. So I'm familiar with that fear in a child's eyes. I mean, when we disappoint someone else who we look up to, we all felt the pang of that fear, haven't we, guys?
Yeah.
We've been late for curfew or backed the car into the mailbox or whatever we've done mistakenly as kids. We all know that fear. We all know that fear. And so my fear was this. I just burned down his house. This isn't a report card. This isn't a bumper on a car. This is everything, man. I burnt down his house. And so I remember thinking he's going to just kill me. This old man, this Army vet, this type A leader is going to rip me up and down when he finds out. And so I'm laying in this bed, the emergency room. I'd never even been in a hospital bed before. So I'm laying in this new space. I'm all by myself. The doctors and nurses are kind of moving around me quickly. And then I hear my dad's voice down the hall. And he's barking out at some poor nurse, "Where is my boy, John?" And I'm 9, hearing the voice, and I'm thinking, dude, this old man has come to finish me off. These guys are wasting their time. And one of them does me no favor. She brings him back into the room, pulls back the curtain. He marches in, points down, and if you've ever been in trouble, you know that what sometimes works is if you cross your arms and shut your eyes and try to get small. So that's what I'm trying to do, man. My arms are crossed, my eyes are shut. I'm trying to get super small in that bed, just disappear. And then I hear my father's voice cut through it all. And he says, "John, look at me when I'm talking to you." So I look up, and then he adds, "I have never been so proud of anyone in my entire life. And my little buddy today, this morning, I'm just proud to be your dad." And then he says, "I love you. And there's nothing you can do about it." As adults, guys, you hear my voice and you know what's going on. But as a kid, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, nobody told my dad what happened. He doesn't know I burned down the house, man. Maybe I can get away with this.
That's an awesome story, and what an amazing man your father is. And talk about your mom too, because she plays a pivotal role in all this. As her son's fighting for his life, and talk about your mom a little bit.
When I spoke yesterday at a conference, and there was the session I was teaching was kind of on heroes. Like, what does it look like to be a hero? And normally we think they wear capes, I guess, or certainly they wear tights, and they're definitely jacked. I mean, that's a hero right there. And in other words, they're make-believe. Like that's our version of heroes so often today. And I was trying to remind them what heroism actually looks like. And so I'm walking them through this burn story. And where everybody in that room thinks I'm going is, of course, talking about my dad. And dude, my dad is a hero. He's certainly one of my heroes, but he's not the hero in this story. If you had to distill it to one, it's my mom. She is fierce in the way she loves and the way she prays and the way she shows up and her expectancy, like what she knows people can do in their lives. That's a heroic trait. So my mother comes into this room. She takes my right hand. And if your audience is able to see, like, I have no fingers on either hand today. Back then I did, but they were just massively damaged, burned up. So she takes that broken hand, pats my bald head, and she says, "I love you." And I remember thinking, like, man, this must be really serious that both parents are saying they love me. So I look up at her and I say, "Mom, knock it off with the love. Am I going to die?" And I remember asking the question because I was looking for hope, not truth. There's a difference sometimes. I just wanted to be kind of patted on the back, if you will, and just encouraged. And instead of doing that, she provided truth, which we need in families, in business, in our health, in our nations. Truth, man. Not your version of it or the way you're feeling today. Not that kind of truth. I mean, capital T. And this lady looks at me and she says, "Baby, do you want to die? It's your choice. It's not mine." And so I looked at her and I said, "Mom, I sure don't want to die. I want to live." And her response, it's so heroic, I think, was, "Good, honey. Then look at me. You take the hand of God, you walk the journey with him, and you fight like you never fought before." She said, "Your father and I are going to be with you every step along this fight, but do your part, baby. Fight." And guys, like that morning, man, I'd never heard of third-degree burns or amputations or skin grafts or debridement. I had no idea the process. But I knew with conviction on the front side, we I like that word better than me, we would get through this thing. I knew we were clear on where this thing was going. I knew it would be hard. I knew it would be difficult, but I knew we would get through it. We would fight.
Yeah, amazing mother and father, amazing family, and to be able to encourage you to push through, you push off all of this on your family about how they helped you get through it. But deep down, you're the one that had to make the choice. You're the one that had to make that decision to, hey, I am going to fight. And you did. And it's a testament to you. But as we fast forward a little bit.
Can I speak to that for 1 second?
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me, because I still struggle with that. And I was speaking to a group of Marines a couple months ago. I love our servants, man. I love our veterans. I love our Marines. I'm an honorary Marine now, so I'm deeply grateful for that. And this man was just telling me, like, "Thank you for the work you do, and thank you for the story you have." And I kept deflecting. I'm like, "Well, but you guys." Then he's like, "Yeah, your story." I'm like, "Yeah, but my mom." He's like, "Yeah, but the love." I'm like, "Dude, that's my wife." And finally, he took both of his big old fat Marine strong hands, put them on my shoulders like this, like you would if you were talking to like a young teenage kid. And he looked me in the eyes and he said, "John," and then he cursed. He said, "Take the effing compliment. Say the words back to me. Thank you." And those are hard words for us to say and like mean, but I'm trying to learn what he's really trying to teach me. When someone praises what you've done, it's important to recognize that you're part of that story. And so I struggle with this, but dude, I appreciate what you're saying. So I'm looking back at you and I'm saying thank you. I do recognize that I was a part of this story now.
Absolutely. So we fast forward a little bit, and you're recovering in the hospital. And a story probably not a lot of people know unless they've read your book. There's a special nurse, Nurse Roy. Can you talk about Nurse Roy and what he meant for you in that time of recovery?
I can't talk about him in the amount of time we have because it would fill up 3 podcasts. But Nurse Roy was a minimum wage CNA. And my dad is in and out of the hospital a lot lately. And what that means, a CNA, sometimes they're the ones oftentimes who are like helping with bedpans, flipping patients, getting them in and out of wheelchairs, doing the most difficult work so often, and oftentimes being overlooked for it, oftentimes being underappreciated for it, oftentimes being grossly underpaid for it. They're the frontline caregiver. And it is, I think, some of the most difficult work that takes place within healthcare. They're awesome, in other words. But that's this guy's job, just to do the difficult work. But this man had been inspired by our doctor. His name was Vachiavajan, just turned 90 last weekend. Vachiavajan to do bigger things in his work and in his life. And I hope all of us hear that. The leader had inspired the staff to do bigger things in their work and in their life. So Roy would come into the room every day and not just like flip me or move me around or check the bandages. He would inspire me. He would pick me up from the bed. He would unhook me from all the things that connected me to that bed, the arms, the legs, the beeping machines, pick me up upright. My legs would then dangle between his. Back then I had no muscle mass at all, so I can't bear weight. And most people think I never will. Most people are pretty sure I'll never walk again. He brings me back toward the bandage change, and my little legs are just dangling between his. And on the walk back, he says to me in my right ear, "Boy, listen to me. You are going to walk again. You might as well get used to it. Now move those legs because today you walk and I'll walk with you." First time I heard, I'm emotional saying that story right now, but first time I heard those words, I wasn't emotional with pride. I was emotional with hate, because I knew the guy was not only inflicting physical pain on me, like it causes throbbing I can't describe, but I also knew he was lying. I was never going to walk again. So he's wasting his time and he's inflicting pain. And the following day, I'm hanging out in my little hospital bed by myself doing my thing. And then the door opens up. Nurse Roy comes back, and this big old tough African-American man, looked just like Apollo Creed, picks me back up, unhooks the left arm, the right arm, the left leg, the right leg, swoops me up into those big masculine arms and says to me, "Boy, listen to me. You're going to walk again. You might as well get used to it." And then he adds, because this is the critical piece, guys, "Move those legs because today you walk and I'll walk with you. I'll walk with you." This guy, for about minimum wage, doing incredibly difficult work, being overlooked, being underpaid, being fought against by the other patients, was teaching a little boy not only how to walk forward in life, but how to cast a bigger vision for his life. Like, this guy wasn't just moving me back toward the bandage change, which was his job. He was casting a vision of possibility. And I didn't understand that during the 5 months I was in hospital. But as I walked into the office today, as I walked out of my bedroom, kissed my wife goodbye, walked into my 4 babies' rooms and made sure they were all doing all right before I left for work this morning. As I walked through life, I realized so much of what I'm able to do today rests on the shoulders of that great man, that vision, his work, those words, that life. So, yeah, I mean, Roy is a warrior. He's an awesome man.
Yeah, what an inspiration. Again, I mean, you just keep stacking these up with your family, with Nurse Roy. Another critical piece to this story that, for me, you know, Ben and I, we coach our young kids in basketball and in football. And so we're heavily involved in our children's lives, and we deal with a lot of parents. And you've already talked about your mom and dad, but I think for me, what really hits home the most is when you make it home and you're having your first meal with your family. Talk about that story, because, you know, in today's world, it seems like what they call helicopter parents, where everybody wants to protect their child, you know, and your mom essentially does the opposite of this. She puts it back on you. She doesn't let you become the victim. So talk about that story when you finally make it home and it's time to have your first meal with your family.
Yeah, and I hope every one of your athletes and their parents neighbors and their parents' neighbors' neighbors and their neighbors listen to this, because I don't know anybody who parents like this anymore. I don't know anybody, including the guy about to answer this question, who parents like this anymore. So buckle up, man. Get ready for a difficult story, but the story that ultimately leads to you and I connecting today on a podcast.
Yep.
I mean, we're like, it's that important of a lesson she's about to teach. So I mean, you all can you can imagine what it's like. Just imagine to spend 5.5 months in hospital, to have all of your skin burned off, and to have it slowly pieced back together, piece by piece, to go through rounds of amputations, bandage changes for 2.5 hours each day, physical therapy that is indescribably grueling, OT, like all the weight of hospitalization. And then you come home. So like that is finally behind you, the end of the chapter, the beginning of the best is yet to come. Celebration time, people. So it's on all of those heels that this story rests. Like this should be a moment, a climax. And it's not. So here's what happens. We have a big, huge surprise party when John gets rolled into the house. Like I did not expect it, but marching bands and friends and school buses of kids. The thing was awesome. It was an incredible party. Door shuts. Mom makes my favorite dinner. We sit down. I'm in my little wheelchair at the head of the table. We say a prayer together. And then it's time to eat. Everybody starts eating. The only issue is John O'Leary at age 9 had no fingers. Still doesn't, it turns out. They don't grow back. So I can't eat. My sweet sister, Amy, she's the one who held me in the front yard. She remains this compassionate woman today. I think like trees, you can see who you're going to become as an adult by identifying who you are as a kid. Like those rings grow upward. So this beautiful, compassionate girl picks up a fork, scoops up some potatoes, brings them toward my mouth. And right as the potatoes are about to enter on in, man, I hear to my right my mother say, Amy, drop the fork. If John's hungry, he will feed himself. I remember, first of all, seeing Amy's mouth like open, like aghast. Like, what? And then I look to my right, and my mom isn't even looking at me anymore. She goes back to cutting her chicken or whatever she's doing. And I'm like, Mom, I can't eat. And then I hear my mother say again to Amy, honey, if he's hungry tonight, he feeds himself. And you think about that, guys. I mean, seriously, like think about that for a moment. I wrote about this when the book came out in 2016 for a parent magazine. And many of the comments were negative, saying that is cruel and unusual. Why in the world would that mother not feed her child? Do your job, Mom. That's what we do in society, man. You feed your kids. And that's what it should seem like. That's what it felt like to me. And eventually what happens is I figured out a way. It took 2 hours. 2 plates were flipped. Our golden retriever, who came into dinner that night already obese, had 2 mighty meals, man, because this thing just sat at my foot side and was going to town eating up. But by the end of that night, this little boy had figured out a way to wedge a fork between his 2 hands, scoop up potatoes, move it toward his mouth, take a bite, and while chewing, look angrily toward his mother. But the piece to the story that bears repeating is, but he's feeding himself. He is taking a mighty freaking step from being a victim to life's circumstances to becoming a victor over them. We can't always choose the path we walk in life, but we can always choose the manner in which we walk forward. And although I didn't have language like that back then, as I reached down and got my second bite of potatoes and then a bite of chicken and then a bite of green beans, this evil, cruel, mean mom is teaching a little boy agency. And you brought it up in the way you asked the question, man. We love snow plowing for our kids, man. If that coach doesn't play our kid the right way, we'll switch teams. Well, some of us will move houses to move into school districts so our kids get the right coach, the right class, the right whatever we want for our kid to get exactly what we know they need. And sometimes the harder thing to do is to allow the child to learn the painful lesson that sometimes life doesn't go perfectly for you. And there's a beautiful lesson in that too. I had a guy on, Seth Godin. I don't know if you've heard of Seth Godin.
Yep.
He becomes this marketing guru. But he talked about one of the times when he learned the most about life is not when he was on top of the world athletically. It was the worst season he ever had athletically. He sat at the end of the bench. The parents wanted to get him off the team. He wanted to get off the team, but his parents refused. They said, man, there's a lesson to be learned. And he said, dude, that season taught me more about leadership, more about sacrifice, more about life than any other season from my childhood. This is a guy who's probably written 15 best-selling books, has a beautiful family, big impact in charity, who learned a lesson through adversity. We must go through the fire to learn.
That's 100%. And I hope that everyone hears that. I hope that every parent hears that because, my wife, Kim, and I, we try to parent like that. And it's hard because you don't want your kids to struggle. But when you look back on your life, I look back on my life, what I remember the most, where I made the biggest gains in my life, or when I was in the deepest struggle. When I was struggling the most is where I learned the most and I got better. And that is such an important thing for all parents out there.
Yes, preach. And it doesn't matter whether it's coaching, classroom, faith, doing your chores around the house, serving on the weekends, volunteering, whatever it is, the struggle will make us better. And in removing that struggle, you remove the ability for your child to reveal grit, courage, sacrifice, agency. I know we've used that word a bunch of times, but man, that is a powerful word, agency, the ability to overcome struggle.
Absolutely. So, John, you have an awesome podcast called the Live Inspired Podcast. Again, I don't know if I said it on the podcast or we were talking before. That's one of those. I've got about 7 I listen to every week. And I actually, when I first heard your story, it was when you were on Ed Milet. And I was walking in our local arboretum and I hear your story. And there's just tears rolling down my face. And Ed's an amazing guy and he's able to do amazing interviews, but you're right there with him. But what I want to say is I want to flip the table on you a little bit. So you end every podcast, the Live Inspired podcast, with a list of 7 questions. You call it the Live Inspired 7. And I'm going to do the same for you because I haven't heard you answer these questions.
That's cheating. I had to come up with I'm not doing your work, dude. You do your own work, man.
Sorry, this is my show. So, question number 1. What's the best book you've ever read?
Wow. So I don't know if anyone's ever walked me through these. So it's funny because I've done, as you mentioned, the Live Inspired podcast now for 7 years or so. We've interviewed 700 people, like from Bob Costas to some of the guys you've had on your show to astronauts like Jim Lovell. He's the guy from Apollo 13. Houston, we've got a problem. Right? It's like all these types of folks have gone through these 7 questions, and now I get to line up behind them, which is pretty cool. So the best book I've ever read, the way I'm asking that question most recently is what's been the most impactful? Because I think that's a different answer. And I'm going to give you that one. For me, the most impactful book I've ever read is called Overwhelming Odds. A little nothing book, man, written 15 years ago or so by my mom and dad. They wrote it to tell their church community what happened in our family, what happened in our community, how God showed up in mighty ways through each of their work. They printed 100 copies. They've sold about 100,000 cents. One of the copies they sold was to your guest today named John O'Leary. Mm-hmm. And if you're reading between the lines, that means my parents made me buy my own book. Okay. So for $10, man, I got to give mom and dad Alexander Hamilton and read what happened to me. And it was the first time I'd ever really identified the fact that the ugliness was beautiful. Yeah. I'd always tried to hide from my scars, always. And then I read this book. And in fact, I'm looking at a picture. I'll show it to you. It happens to be right in front of me. Looking at this little picture. Oops.
Yeah.
I'm going to switch back to the other camera for a second.
Yeah, that's amazing. Overwhelming odds.
It's a picture of a little boy on the front of it with scars, with a neck brace. All this other stuff is going on in his life, and yet he's got this radiant joy in his eyes. And he had it as a kid. I think he lost it shortly after the fire for a while, but I've got it back again, I hope now, because I've read it in my mom and dad's story. I finally recognized that my life was a precious, priceless gift, and I need to say yes to being used for good. So that overwhelming odds changed my life.
Great answer. What's one positive characteristic or trait you possessed as a child that you wish you still exhibited today?
Dude, you probably won't believe it, but I audacity. I was fearless. And now I fake fearlessness. You know, like I walk on a stage and I try to break up fights when I see them taking place in airports. And like I try to pretend like I'm fearless, but every single time I'm scared walking into it. And when I was a kid, I didn't even know what fear meant. That's probably what got me burned. But it's also what allowed me to be so radiant as a kid and so alive. And I think when we are most alive, we're not living in fear, we're living in faith. So I want to return to that.
If your house caught fire and your family and your pets were safe, what's the one item you'd run back in and save?
So I have two hands, so I would grab two things. Did you guys read a book called In Awe that I wrote?
Yes.
Wow. All right. So you've really, really done the work. But I wrote in there about what you focus on grows. And so in 2016 and 2017, my marriage, it wasn't bad. It just wasn't awesome. So I wanted to improve it by focusing on her beauty. I found myself kind of focusing on the things she was doing wrong rather than what made her so awesome. I do that all the time. It's one of my weaknesses. So that year I tracked my wife Beth's beauty, and I just wrote down little things I saw her do every day that were just beautiful. And I quietly wrote it down, never told her I was doing this. And on Christmas, I gave her this journal of 360 entries of her shining light. Whether it was something she wore, something she did for a neighbor, the way she's raising our kids, something she did for my dad who's got Parkinson's disease, whatever. Just moments of grace that Beth embodied. And so it was this awesome gift that changed my life during that year I wrote it, but it's also changed positively our marriage since. So I would grab that book with my right hand, and in my left hand, you guys know the story, but I had a radio announcer and friend named Jack Buck. He was the broadcaster for the St. Louis Cardinals. He was a Hall of Famer in 7 different Hall of Fames. So this was a celebrity. And one of the things that he got for one of the Hall of Fames when he went into Cooperstown in New York for baseball is he got a crystal baseball. It's an heirloom. It's priceless. And when I graduated university, because of our friendship, this man showed up at the party and gave me this crystal baseball. And I did not feel worthy of it then. I don't feel worthy of it today, but I want to make sure that when the house burns, we grab that, because I want to remind my kids and those who see that ball later on what generosity looks like, not success. Facebook and Instagram and your neighbors will tell you what success looks like. I want them to see what significance looks like. My friend Jack Buck was a successful man, but what made him meaningful, memorable, and unforgettable was the fact that he gave it all away. Throughout his entire life, this guy was just serving people. And so my wife's journal is in my right hand, and this crystal baseball is in my left.
That's awesome. If you could sit on a bench overlooking a gorgeous view and have a long conversation with anyone living or deceased, who would it be?
Man. So I got two cheeks to sit on, man. So I'm going to grab two friends. My dad, and I'm not going to go into detail because you'll see a grown man cry in front of you, but my dad's got Parkinson's disease, has had it for 33 years. And right now he is just struggling big time. He's been struggling for decades, but right now it's climaxing. So he's in and out of hospital, in and out of normal cognitive function. Like, so he's just wrestling. And I haven't heard his voice in a decade. Not in the way I used to hear it. I would love to hear my dad's voice. I would love to grill him on what it was like growing up. I'd love to do a podcast with my dad, and I can't. So I would love to have dad over here, and then on my right side, I think half the New Testament is written by St. Paul. This dude was crazy. I mean, just a crazy man who was stoned and beat and broken and ultimately murdered, and yet did it all for something bigger than himself. And here, 2,000 years later, we're still reading words that were relevant 2,000 years ago when they were written, transformed little communities to whom he wrote it, Corinth or Rome or wherever else he sent these letters, and still transform lives today. And I would love to just sit down next to a guy as mission-centric as Paul and say, dude, what was it that made you blind? And what was it that opened back up your eyes? I'd love to hear his story.
Yeah, that's amazing. St. Paul and your dad, that's awesome. What's the best advice you've ever received?
From my mom. She, growing up, had a little plaque in our kitchen, and it said, "This too shall pass." And dude, I mean, for a while, my family just had no issues. Like, my dad was an attorney, small business owner, successful, 6 kids, good marriage, big yard, healthy dogs. And then we had a house fire. Then we had Parkinson's disease. Then we had some emotional health issues with some siblings. Then we had a second house fire, if you can imagine, like thing after thing. And then Parkinson's disease, and then the loss of job, lack of employment, loss of all income, big weight. So my mom had this little plaque in her house when we were on top of the world. This too shall pass. And my mother had this plaque in her kitchen when we were on bottom of the weight of the world. This too shall pass. And I think that's a really good reminder, regardless of where you find yourself today, listening to our conversation, that whatever you're going through, man, it's just a moment. And I don't think we should give it a little more weight than it deserves. We ought to just kind of celebrate the fragileness, the sanctity, the beauty of this moment, and pray that the next moment is even better.
Yeah, that's great. What advice would you give yourself at age 20?
Be yourself. Just, I back then I was trying to fit in. I took on the employment of what my buddies were doing. I took on the drinking habits and other addictions that my other buddies were participating in. I was masking up because I was unworthy of who I was. And it would be really cool to just be genuinely, unabashedly, unashamedly who I was and who I am. It's enough. This is kind of inside information, but I'm kind of working on a book now called Enough. And it's 2-pronged. One is this reminder, like enough, man, like kind of like exclamation point. Enough, like you've got enough. You've done enough. Stop, enough already. But the other side of it is like, you are enough. Why do you strive, man? Just like, you're sitting next to your wife today. That's enough, dude. Enough. So I would remind myself that you are already enough. Stop faking it.
It's amazing. And the last question, John, it's been said that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like yours to read?
Man, like when they do my introduction at speaking events, it's almost embarrassing. Like I always have to pivot from my story to remind these people I'm not an arrogant jerk, because they talk about 2-time best-selling author and a film, and like they go on and on. I'm like, dude, that is so not me. I'm a Missouri kid. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I love going out to my parents' house. Like, I'm so boring and ordinary. So what I want on my tombstone ultimately is this. I did a podcast years ago in New York, and when I walked out, this guy lived near a temple, and up on the temple, I don't even know what language, probably Hebrew, I guess. It was up in Hebrew, in stone face on this temple in New York. And I'm like, what is that? He said, it's Micah. I'm like, well, okay, what's it say? And what it said was, seek justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God. Pretty good sign to put in any language in New York or Ohio or Indiana or Missouri or anywhere else, or on my gravestone. So as I race forward through podcasts and books and everything else we do, as we race forward raising kids and trying to stay married and loving our parents toward the sunset years, what I want to do more than anything else is just seek justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God.
That's amazing, John. And I know we're getting close here to our time, so we'll wrap this up. But can you give us some information, our listeners, some information on where they can find you, where they can buy your books, kind of give that information out, and then your podcast?
Sure, man. First of all, this was just a great time. Like, sometimes this stuff feels like work, and it's, hey, thank God for it. And other times it feels like a couple guys having a coffee or a beer, and this feels far more like the latter. So you guys were great. It was an honor. And if folks want to stay in touch with me, I'm at johnolearyinspires.com. So johnolearyinspires.com. And on that website, they can learn more about our social media and our podcast. It's called Live Inspired. Our books, my email's there, my phone number's there. I know on Ed Milet, man, I don't think I would call it a mistake, but I gave out my number on that podcast, and that was an overwhelming deal because I wasn't expecting what was about to happen. And it's kind of funny, but it wasn't like, hey, John, great podcast. It was like, hey, John, I'm about to take my life. What should I do? My wife left me. What should I do? My parents are getting divorced. What should I do? It was this weighty stuff. But I gave him my number because I wanted them to know, like, I love him. I'm here for you. And so I gave you my website, johnolearyinspires.com. And on that site, you'll find my number. You'll find my email, and you'll know my heart. And if I can do something for you guys, you got me.
Oh, John, we really appreciate it. I want to end this with a Bible verse. It's Job 23, verse 10. It says, "But he knows the way that I take. When he has tested me, I will come forth as gold." John O'Leary, you, my friend, are gold.
That is a solid quote, man. Way to drop the mic. Let's go to the tattoo parlor and get that on our biceps.
Hey, John, man, we appreciate you. I know you got a busy day today. I wish you and your family a very Merry Christmas and a safe and healthy New Year. And we thank you for being on the BeTempered podcast.
Honor, man. God bless you guys. Have a great Christmas and a wonderful start to the new year.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Hi, my name is Allie Schmidt. This is my dad, Dan. He owns Caitlin's Glass.
Thanks, Allie. Things like doors and windows go into making a house. But when it's your home, you expect more, like the great service and selection you'll get from Caitlin's Glass. Vinyl replacement windows from Caitlin's come with a lifetime warranty, including accidental glass breakage replacement. Also ask for custom shower doors and many other products and services. Call 962-1636. Locally owned with local employees for nearly 30 years.
Caitlin's Glass, the clear choice.